Coming up next, Dangerous Laughter by Stephen Millhauser. Ha ha ha. Hey everybody, welcome to the Bookening. My name is Nathan Alberts and I'm your humble and obedient host. We've got Brandon Chastain, the scholar who's a baller of books right there.
Hey.
Little sunburned.
Oh yeah, I've been outside working a lot.
He's been outside working a lot.
I enjoy it, Nathan.
Brandon, you know what I enjoy is when you introduce the third person in our triumvirate of terror.
His name is Jacob Kyle Menzel.
That's me.
Yep.
Hey, how would you rate the level of danger of Nathan's laughter at the top of the show?
Out of what scale?
Likelihood that Nathan's about to stab you
Like
in the
the Richter
face.
scale? A 10.
10 being he's already stabbing me in the face, and
10.
1 being 10.
Yeah, he stabs us in the face.
Now, to be fair, I am in fact stabbing Brandon in the face right now.
He is. We're very good at concealing it, but he does it all the time while we're recording.
That's a little joke, folks. I don't stab Brandon in the face. You didn't say what Jake's title is.
He is the pastor who is a master of reading.
That's right. And
Not a pastor who is the master, but the pastor who is a master.
I think
Or is he the pastor who's the master? He's the master of reading, right?
the pastor who's a master.
The article matters.
The article does matter.
There is no other pastor who is a master quite like him, so he's the pastor who's the master of reading. Yeah.
He's the one pastor who's a master of reading. The second article doesn't actually matter that much. Because there's only one pastor who's a master of reading.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
There's other
I don't
people
need
who are
exclusionary
I
article
don't
from
need
the
to
very
be
beginning.
the master of reading.
right. You're
period.
not the only master of reading.
We're
I mean,
3 masters.
I
in
can
this
think of
room.
at least 2 others. That's right.
Yeah. The host who's the master of reading.
Right, but that doesn't really trip off the tongue.
The old
esophagus.
It kind of trips off the tongue.
Yeah, it does. It trips and stumbles
Actually.
and falls and dies.
Yeah.
Let's make a case for this episode.
Yeah.
Ask not what Millhauser could do for you. Bringing out my great impression. It's like John F. Kennedy came back from the dead.
Oh, that was great. Wait, is John F.
Yeah.
We should just spend this whole episode just listening to and dissecting that Bob Dylan song.
Oh, brother.
Rub-a-dub-dub.
Rub-a-dub-dub.
Why would we do that when we have a great book of 13 short stories that we can be talking about?
That's what I wanted to get to, Jake. Not just the book, but there's some people probably listening to this who haven't heard of Millhauser or hasn't read Millhauser. They just clicked on it because they like the Bookening.
Yeah.
Or I thought maybe the very first thing right out of the gate we could do is make a case for why someone might be interested in this book and what, just in case we've got some noobs, some Millhauser. What's the word that I want?
Noobs.
Yeah, some noobs. Some
that's
noobs.
Yo, noobs.
Just in case we got some noobs, bro.
Millhauser is one of those people that he's for cool.
Consummate master.
He's for cool people. He's the kind of person that cool people know about. And
He's the one that we feel comfortable talking about.
yeah, there's
the-
one other.
The master of all the cool people.
Yeah.
But we don't talk
just
about
in terms of like
Yeah.
modern, well, and he doesn't even count because he's not alive anymore.
He's not alive anymore, and I think that
He
he
died.
runs circles around Millhauser.
The other guy?
personally. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I just don't compare them.
Yeah. They're doing 2 very different things.
It's
right?
Dennis
So-
Johnson.
Yeah. Dennis Johnson and Stephen Millhauser are 2 of the coolest
They're cool.
recent
Coolest
writers.
cats.
Short
Dennis-
story writers.
Dennis Johnson had the distinction of also, I think, being a genius.
Yeah.
There is that.
Yeah. I mean,
and ruining his life. and
Dennis
dying.
Johnson is much more depraved in his way
He
than
is.
Millhauser. Well, that's an argument.
But he hits moments of beauty that Millhauser doesn't hit.
Yeah, but Millhauser's also not going for moments of beauty.
That's true. We'll talk about that.
Okay, so what does Stephen Millhauser do? Let's just spend like 2 more minutes making just a general, like, I remember, actually, no, go ahead.
Well, you're going to do a better job of defining this than I am because he's your guy. You introduced him to me.
I think I introduced
me
him
to
to
him.
both of you guys,
Yeah,
probably.
The only, I had
Um,
heard of him once before, but I had not been driven to read him.
But he very much specializes in, I would say, the uncanny but not in a
spectral way.
Yeah, not in a spectral way, but just in that feeling of this. He's really good at he's just one of the most evocative writers I've ever read in terms of he can put you in a place, make you smell, make you taste, make you touch, and then upset you, make you feel uncomfortable or push things to a place that feels unsettling or interesting or
But the funny thing is,
want in a short story writer, somebody who makes you look at the world in a different way, right?
The weird thing about that, though, is even as you say that, I'm like, that's a perfect description, and yet it's entirely inadequate because it makes people think of
the wrong things.
The wrong things that you think of Twilight Zone and Twin Peaks, and it does have kind of some of that feeling, but it's like those things, if they were dialed down and subtle and there was nothing overtly supernatural about them or overtly monstrous, but there was a lot of stuff
that just sort of built. And
it would be like if you took Twin Peaks and you cut out the murder, or you took Twilight Zone and you kept the same feeling, but you cut out the alien menace or whatever it is.
Yeah, he doesn't have to do something outlandish in order to evoke that feeling. And that's part of the genius of Millhauser, right?
Yeah.
Like he doesn't have to bring in a monster or a vampire or...
No, there is the monstrous and the vampiric and the human depravity
it all
too.
Feels much more... I mean, there are places where he is super extravagant, but it also manages to feel more mundane or prosaic.
Yeah, well, for one thing, he writes in a way that's very, I don't want to say mundane or prosaic because his language can be beautiful and ornate, but his characters are generally very low key and not emotional and not extravagant in the way that they express themselves, except for when
they're hitting an extravagant world.
They're hitting,
right.
Yeah,
it's the extravagance of it, not a thing that it's hard to. It really is hard to put a finger on. And
there is a literary term for all this, but I'll get to that in my context.
Oh, well, that's a good hook.
Yeah. So.
Well, maybe that's where we should go. I don't know.
I think we've done enough introducing.
Yeah, I mean, so we'll briefly get to his bio at the end because it sounds like this natural transition into the main idea I want to deal with today. We're going to treat this more like a thematic class.
Yeah.
So what we've been tiptoeing around is this idea of what theorists and...
Oh, by the way, Brandon, you're the contextual context and you provide much needed context.
Oh, that's right. Yeehaw, bang, bang, bang.
In case people didn't know. Okay, go ahead.
You might want to dodge. Those bullets are probably going to come down.
Yep. Here they come.
Oh, you got me. I'm dead.
Yep, that's too bad.
That's a really weak gun for the bullet to come down so quick.
It's like one of those Roger Rabbit guns. Just the bullet's alive.
Yep.
Kind of just melts down and... Okay.
Talk about a movie that doesn't hold up for kids at all.
No, it's an awful movie for kids.
It's really just kind of an awful movie for everybody, but it's got its entertaining points, I guess. Go ahead.
So I was reading an interview that he did for Transatlantica, and there are a couple things that I wanted to read. Disruption is at the center of many of my stories, and what is disruption, if not the sudden emergence of strangeness from the ordinary? And he says, I was trying to be as enigmatic as possible in these stories. Also, this guy asks, what world are you? So he says, if I create fictional other worlds, it's only in order to penetrate the one world that interests me. And this interviewer says, well, what world would that be?
Mm-hmm.
And so he says, which world? Says, the astonishing one presented to me by my senses, the world that I relentlessly question in my stories. It's true enough that I borrow myths when they suit my purposes. Here, among other things, I was trying to present a heaven that is desperately longed for. So this is apparently whatever story he's talking about here. But the most vital place of all is the structure that joins the two worlds, the ephemeral tower itself, the embodiment of desire. And then earlier he had talked about he's very obsessed with architectures, America's love of vastness, vast bridges, vast buildings, vast works of art to embody the vastness of the land. In other words, art's meant to reflect the world that we live in, but in a way to make it different. It disrupts that vision. And this actually has a very technical literary term behind it. The history, it comes from 1917 with the theorist, his name is hard to say, Shklovsky. Shklovsky was Viktor Shklovsky, and he and Bakhtin were the fathers of what's called Russian formalism.
Mm-hmm.
This was in the early 1900s. And one of their main... So we've talked about Bakhtin before. We talked about his theory of the carnival. I know that we've done that in the past. But one of their other theories was the idea of defamiliarization. All this means, and so here's actually a quote, the purpose of art is to impart the sensation of things as they are perceived and not as they are known. The technique of art is to make objects unfamiliar, to make forms difficult to increase the difficulty, in length of perception because the process of perception is an aesthetic end in itself and must be prolonged. In other words, it's to take a look at the world around us and to make it seem strange and unusual so that we can actually know it better.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so here's another quote. This one's kind of technical, but in studying poetic speech in its phonetic and lexical structure, as well as in its characteristic distribution of words and in the characteristic thought structures compounded from the words, we find everywhere the artistic trademark. So in other words, in all poetic language, you find this trademark. He's just trying to sound fancy. That is, we find material obviously created to remove the automatism of perception. In other words, the tyranny of perception, the automatic process of perception. The author's purpose is to create the vision which results from that de-automatized perception. And so in other words, to make yourself think about what you're looking at. That's all he's saying. And to make it seem unusual and strange to you, so that a work is created artistically so that its perception is impeded and the greatest possible effect is produced through the slowness of the perception. In other words, to kind of slow down your ability to understand. So David Lynch fits perfectly into this category of the defamiliarization. It's something that seems like you should know what it's doing and what it's about. It's like, it's kind of the end. So the other, and I think last time we talked about Millhauser, we talked a bit about the uncanny. And this is also a very technical term as well. The uncanny comes from Freudian psychology, which literally just means that it's these when these unconscious desires and urges come to the surface in dream, and you feel almost like you should understand what this is about, but you can't quite, right? It's the return of this desire that you think that you should understand, but you just don't quite understand it. That's the uncanny, and it often seems strange and weird. And so defamiliarization falls into a similar category, but this defamiliarization is an intentional artistic process where the author is attempting to make the world seem strange to you. And they're doing it so that you are forced to, I mean, a way to summarize all this, because this was just academic prose and they're attempting to sound very scientific, and really all they're saying is that it's like a slap in the face. And the author, the artist is trying to make you come to terms with the fact that most of what you look at in life, you do very automatically without even thinking about it. And they're trying to force you to stop and think about the fact that these things in life can be very strange. And so you had the one story in the second part about the guy who, they are just supposed to catalog every historical event, right? And so what was that story called? I forget the name of it.
I don't have it.
But it's because, and he's talking about, like even a piece of cellophane in the grass blowing in the wind. To them, that's an important thing to notice. And I'm pointing at the window as though there's a piece of cellophane up there.
And I looked.
There's
I'm
not.
the dummy that looked.
I think that's the particular image he uses. But it's like every detail matters, in other words. And we get so caught up in the process of our own life that we often don't pay attention to these details. Now, all they're doing is, so these guys were attempting to describe how poetic language works. And if you go back and listen to our poetry episodes, there's some, we agree with some of this. Poetry is meant to help you to learn to take delight in the details of life. Things that you might often, not just the details of life, but also the details of our language, the beauty of it, the sound and the rhythms of it. And then by combining these two things, you get the peculiar aesthetic responses that poetry gives to you. That's just the basic definition of what. And so they're trying to describe how poetic language works. And they're saying it largely works through this defamiliarization. Why is that important? Well, because that's what Millhauser, my thesis would be that that's what Millhauser does. He participates in this sort of defamiliarization process. And that's why I wanted to bring this up. That was going to be the last thing that I brought up in my context, but it's because it's like the one rabbit I had in my hat today. But you guys were already getting to it. Look at that.
Yeah,
you beat me to the punch.
Well, it's like we laugh every day. Now let's take the title story as an example. Now let's take a step back and actually see what's in there and see some of the, in this case, orgiastic release and all these things. So it's something familiar, but he recontextualizes it in a way that shows you what's weird, what's creepy, what's dangerous.
Yes.
About it.
And so my only comment about defamiliarization, the where you have to use discernment, is that they often, kind of like Baudelaire when he said that you have to also look at the nasty side of the city. And that's so we talked about him last week with T.S. Eliot, with our Cats episode with T.S. Eliot. defamiliarization shares in that. Like, so their theory of the carnival is that, once a year, so it was talking about the Mardi Gras, and like that's at the heart of Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I actually think that's the novel they use. That political systems, I hate that word, systems, but anyways, they need these moments where those who are disenfranchised can come out and party. And it's really about the grotesque. Right. Oh, that's where we talked about it. It was with Flannery O'Connor.
Yeah.
Now I remember. Okay. And so they really make a lot about the grotesque in literature and how grotesqueness allows things that would typically not be looked at to be looked at. And so that's the danger also with defamiliarization, is that really what matters is for you to look at the things that you wouldn't necessarily notice and for the world to seem strange. And so that's where you get like the weird Eraserhead sort of mentality of David Lynch.
Well, this whole time I've been thinking of the most famous scene from David Lynch where the guy has the heart attack on the beautiful green lawn with the perfect little suburban house. And then we zoom in and we zoom in and we zoom into the grass. And then suddenly we're in this world of maggots and spiders and creepy things crawling all over the place. And
in the case of this book, it's the title story, Dangerous Laughter, which just is kind of a sophomoric attempt at an allegory for sexual awakening.
Yeah. One of the weakest stories in the book.
It is the weakest story.
Yeah.
So Millhauser, he's really good at his trick, but it can kind of be one trick. And that's where the process of defamiliarization can get a little bit tedious. And so if just a little historical background to where like some other artists who were into defamiliarization, really only one worth mentioning, which would be Borges. And Borges is kind of the intellectual father, I would say, of Millhauser.
Absolutely.
And he's worth reading, but Borges can be pretty tedious as well. But it's the same sort of idea, these stories. So we had talked a lot about Borges in our magical realism episode.
Yeah.
Which we did with
Midnight's Children,
Midnight's Children, that's right. He died in 1986. And so I was going to say he didn't die that long ago. I wasn't going to say he never died.
He actually never died.
He's
immortal.
He just became a book.
Well, interestingly, given you talking about it being a repetitive trick, Borges very much agreed with you and gave up writing those kinds of stories at a certain point in his career.
Probably the true intellectual father of all of them would be Escher, and he was way before either of them. And so with his mathematical paintings that, I mean, I think most people know who Escher is, right? You guys can, Escher. You can go out and look him up if you've never seen an Escher painting, but it's like these, you get to kind of see it with, people have seen Inception, where, you can make a walkway that somehow goes up and down at the same time, so you can never escape this loop. And it's this all playing with illusion.
Doctor Strange.
Yeah, Doctor Strange. That sort of, exactly, Doctor Strange. That sort of fascination with appearances. And Millhauser is very much involved with that as well. In fact, his most famous book became The Illusionist. It became the
Edward Norton movie. Yeah.
And so he's very much concerned with this other sort of sideshow, but more, not so much the Barnum sideshow, the other creepy, mysterious Houdini sort of sideshow, where the Tesla, that would have been influential in that sort of brand of weird, strange America. And I think people know hopefully what I'm talking about when I say that.
Yeah, well, he loves what ifs and might have beens and almost beens and historical anomalies But
yeah, and like in that interview, it's particularly the American brand of it, which is through science and technology and architecture. The sort of expanse that you have with highways that then lead to the...
Often connected to art and commerce one way or another.
Yes, and so you see that very much with whatever that story was in this volume about the Edison. Ripoff, The Wizard of West Orange. Yeah. And so he'll give you this defamiliarizing process, but through the sort of American lens of technology and commerce and art, like you said. That was the whole point of Martin Dressler, was a guy trying to build a hotel that contained the world. Right. Basically. And so, and with these, so you get people trying to build the Tower of Babel, basically, and it failing, interestingly. People trying to catalog every detail of life, all these these weird stories. My favorite in the volume being the death of Elaine Coleman. I think it's the most successful story. Yeah. And I think it's probably because it's the most unique. It stands out the most from the others.
I think that's probably true.
But anyways, so that's Millhauser. Those are kind of the big conceptual things I wanted to get across before we dive in. So just a little, there's not a whole lot to say about him. He was married for a little while. He's no longer married. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 97 for Martin Dressler. And he's kind of been, like Jake said, not a cult classic, but he's been a novel for those who really like to try to find the authors who are worth reading who are still alive, who want to make that effort.
Mm-hmm.
And he makes the short list. And he was on the short list he would be up there with Cormac McCarthy and Dennis Johnson until Johnson died.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading some more about Cormac McCarthy the other day, and he's really not a pleasant figure.
You mean his personal life?
Yeah, he's just not a nice guy.
You don't say.
No.
What a surprise.
What a surprise. But as far as I can tell, Millhauser seems just fine. He's very much
looks like a dweeb with a mustache.
Yeah, he's like Salinger. He doesn't do much.
Yeah.
He gives interviews every now and then, but people don't really see him out. He doesn't try to be this cultural figure.
Mm-hmm.
He's very interested in his craft and his art, and that's what he does. And he knows that he does this one thing well, and he does it over and over again. And he gives variety to it. I mean, I would say most of these stories engaged me in some level.
Well, one thing, I suppose we'll get there, but any one of these stories, if I just came across it in the New Yorker or some periodical like that, I would have loved it. It really, I would say, doesn't do them any favors to be stacked on top of each other.
Yeah.
Grouped the way that they are.
And then grouped in categorizations that make it so you're getting some pretty repetitive, like even if you just took this volume and mixed it up a little bit so you weren't getting all the architecture stories at once, it might not hurt anything.
Oh, I mean, I guess when we were talking about influences and intellectual fathers, you can't forget Poe, right?
Yeah.
Poe would be, I would say probably Poe and Borges he's like a hybrid of Poe and Borges, actually, a little bit.
Poe, Borges, a little Kafka, maybe.
Yeah, you get some of that strange weirdness, a little bit of the existential absurd in there, but really not so much absurdism with him.
But I keep thinking of like symbolist painters. What's the guy with the apple in front of the face?
There's Odilon Redone. Yeah, you have Odilon Redone's the one that would do like the weird spider paintings with ivies that looked human and stuff like that. Yeah,
I guess I was thinking of some of the surrealists like Magritte. Yeah.
So
where a lot of times Magritte's famous for the guy with the apple in front of his face and stuff. Something's off about a lot of his pictures, but it's not always as overt as a floating apple. It can just be like, who are these people? Why are they standing here? What is this? It's making reference to something that's kind of uncanny and weird, and tickles the back of your consciousness that way, but is not doing anything explicit in the way that Poe does, or even like Borges. His conceits are really, what if there was a library that contained all the books? Or what if you could touch an aleph and suddenly see everything that was happening in the universe all at once? Generally speaking, Millhauser keeps it a little bit more down to earth, mundane, a little bit more vague.
Yeah. So he's not as conceptual as that.
Right.
But I would say the difference then would be probably Borges is more, so the character is important to Millhauser, even though it seems a lot of the times that he writes one type of character.
Right.
But it's still, character matters to him. While Borges is not so much character driven, he was more philosophical in his inquiries.
Yeah, he really is completely conceptual. It's just like, here's a thing that happened, or that you could imagine. Borges
is very close to probably like an Einsteinian thought experiment. It's just very extended and very whimsical, but it's meant to play with this one concept and idea and riff off of it. Like someone who's kind of in between both of these would be Italo Calvino. I can't really recommend you read him, but in things like Cosmic Comics, or If on a Winter's Night, A Traveler, or The Baron of the Trees, he does similar things to this, where he is very character driven as well. He's good. Italo Calvino is very good, but he's very much Italy's version of Millhauser. These guys who are kind of taking what Borges did, but then adding fictional interests of character and plot and things like that into it as well.
Yeah.
Because the death of Elaine Coleman is a sad story.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing that probably makes it the most successful story in this book, is it's connected to something that's we can empathize with.
But it does, and so they're also postmodern in the sense that but they're more postmodern in the way that Kazuo Ishiguro is postmodern, where they're dealing with kind of the aftermath of postmodernism.
Right.
They're not the ones who created what we look at as postmodernism, and in the sense that Beckett was, right? They're not being inventive that way. They're taking more just traditional storytelling forms in dealing with the emotional aftermath of postmodernism.
Yeah, they're not Millhauser doesn't break convention or push forms in any.
But they're still dealing. But they're still dealing with alienation. They're still dealing with guilt and sadness. I mean, that's at the heart of most of these stories. Is how does our responsibility towards others and our lack of taking responsibility? How are we supposed to think of that now, today, after postmodernism? So. Yeah, and so that puts him right there with Ishiguro. I mean, he's a contemporary with... I'm thinking Ishiguro because we're about to do some more Ishiguro.
Yeah, really looking forward to that.
That's him. There's not a whole lot to say about him. I mean, he was born in New York, grew up in the New England area, pursued a doctorate in English at Brown, but never finished. I don't think we mentioned that about T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot also started his dissertation, but never finished. So,
how many? I wonder what the count of people we've read on the Bookening who actually finished their education. It feels like it would be low.
It's pretty low. Most of these guys got into it because, well, I think what most people find when they go to grad programs who actually love literature and the process of writing, you find out that not everybody in the system. I said it again.
The system.
I hate that word. The system. It's a poser word.
Right.
People. I mean, definitions matter, and I hear people using that word all the time, and it's just to posture themselves. It means nothing.
Well, Brandon hates the system.
I hate the system.
Not a big fan of the man either.
That's right. No.
Or the machine.
Yeah.
You're always raging against that, I've noticed.
I do rage against the machine, yeah. But despite all that rage, I feel like I'm a rat in a cage, Nathan.
Well, any more context about Millhauser?
No, not really.
Speaking of disappearances.
Uh-oh, the disappearance of... Has he ever been here?
Jake Menzel?
Or when did he go? Did you notice him leaving?
I don't know.
Did you realize, I mean...
Was he here at all?
There was that... if I vaguely remember, there might have been a missing sign out on the post for a while, but it's kind of weathered now and faded.
Who are you talking about now?
You remember Jake?
Oh, the guy we used to...
guy we used to podcast, I think. Didn't we podcast with him?
I mean, I remember we've been doing a podcast now a long time. Brandon and Nathan do the Bookening together.
Yeah. I swear there used to be a guy named Jake. You don't remember him?
I mean...
Big wart?
Something? Oh, okay.
His hips never lied?
Yeah. Okay. I remember hips. I remember a wart.
Yeah.
Don't remember much else.
I mean, it was kind of hard.
I can picture the wart, though.
Yeah,
every hair.
Oh, man. Especially that one. It would just stick out and curl.
Yeah, I wanted to yank that thing. Like, get some tweezers, dude. Like,
that'd be horrifying. I mean, you never know. It could be like a plugging up. Whatever would drain out when he picked it.
Oh, yeah, and then he loses his psychic powers or whatever.
That's true. Yeah, he was a Midnight's child.
Yeah, did we mention that Jake was born in midnight of India's Day of Independence?
Yeah.
And was imbued with special powers?
Maybe that's where he went. Maybe he got caught by, her.
Madam Secretary, what's her name?
Something like that. I've read the novel so many times, I should remember. All I can remember is the green and black hair. Idris Elba.
Yeah.
Ingrid Bergman.
Tia Leone. Huh. Well, in any case, Brandon.
Yeah.
I guess we should continue doing this podcast that only features us.
I guess.
So.
Well, let's keep going.
Yeah. What baggage did you bring to Stephen Millhauser?
Okay. So I brought the baggage of Martin Dressler, which I really enjoyed. I brought the baggage of having someone recommend his stories before. I never had read them. Someone really liked, is it The Knife Thrower and Other Stories? Yeah, I see it right there. The Knife Thrower and Other Stories. I never read them, but they recommended them. Said he was good.
Yeah.
I also brought the baggage of last year. I relied on Nathan a lot to help me find stories to do with my class that were short stories and were worth doing. And so I got The Death of Elaine Coleman and did that with my AP Lit class. And that went very well. It was the perfect story to introduce sort of the postmodern ennui that we had talked about earlier. So
yeah, that's a great story.
Loved him.
Yeah, I think that was the first story I ever read by him. I encountered Millhauser in the New York Times Review of Books, of all places, which I don't usually read.
Nice.
There's one book critic, modern book critic I like. His name is Michael Derrida. He writes for the Washington Post. And if you can afford to subscribe to the Washington Post, which I cannot, then
you can read Michael Derrida.
You can read Michael Derrida, and he's very good. I have a couple collections of essays by him. And he's just fun. He's well read. He likes really highbrow stuff and really lowbrow, kind of pulpy stuff. And I recommend him. Anyway, that
he finished his PhD.
think he abandoned Brown. Anyway, I just happened to read like their top 10 books of 2011 or whatever Dangerous Laughter came out. Saw it in there, and they described several of the stories, including Elaine Coleman, and it made it sound really intriguing. And I went to the bookstore and went to Borders, I think.
Nice.
Back in the day.
Remember back then when you could go to Borders, grab a book, and go sit at one of their tables?
Yeah, Borders
And
was the
read.
bomb.
And sometimes try to podcast, and they'll ask you to leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, actually, that was Barnes & Noble's.
Was that Barnes & Noble?
Yeah, Borders was the superior one and the one that went out of business.
Borders was superior.
Yeah.
I would go to Barnes & Noble is where I discovered, it was downtown, Fort Worth is where I discovered old Tolstoy.
Yeah, I can't, no shame there for
Yeah.
old Barnes and or Nobles.
But I miss those bookstores like that, where you could just go and browse and then take a book and go sit by a window seat somewhere and maybe grab a coffee if they had a coffee.
Yeah, me
place.
too. And there's something nice. I mean, I know everybody hates like the monopolization of book selling and all that, but there was something nice about going to a big, successful professional store where you could be sure to get a copy of War and Peace, where, there's the beauty of going to like an old timey bookshop or half price books. Those are fun too. But if you're looking for something specific, it's nice.
You know what? I think I'm going to go put a coffee bar into my new office at my house, make one of my kids tend it.
That sounds great.
So I can feel like I'm in a bookstore, and I'll browse, and then I'll go sit down, I'll grab a coffee, and
I'll come to your house. I'll set like a $10 bill on fire, and it'll feel just like I've gone to a bookstore.
there you go.
Maybe you can get me a bag and some receipt paper that they'll sit in my car for the next 4 weeks.
That sounds great, Nathan.
That sounds great. Let's make it happen.
Let's do it.
So I read this New York Times review of books review of Dangerous Laughter. Thought it sounded great. Got it. Read it. Loved it. Got other Millhauser, Martin Dressler, Knife Thrower, Barnum Museum. I've read it all.
Wow. Yeah.
And
you have.
love
That's literally
it.
his oeuvre right there.
I have not read his other novel, whatever that's called.
Edward Millhauser or something like that?
Yeah, I started it, but I never finished it. And wait a second. Something feels different now, Brennan.
I think. Oh, yeah. Look. Did he come back?
Hi, guys.
Hey, it's Jake.
Oh, hey, Jake.
Hey.
Our friend that we remember and acknowledge all the time.
That's right.
And do this podcast with.
Definitely remember.
Yeah.
Definitely did not vaguely think you had disappeared, but couldn't quite remember whether or not you had.
Or whether you existed at all.
I see. A little Millhauser getting in your heads there, huh?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry about that.
It's serious.
Serious.
Mad at you.
The most mad at you.
Well, it's perfect timing because, you're the host. You
No, Brandon, go ahead. It's fine.
It's perfect.
It's fine.
It's perfect timing because we were just doing our baggage.
Oh.
So we're finished. So you can do yours now.
Yeah.
I'll do my baggage.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I missed some of the context there.
Nah, it's fine.
Who's to say what you missed and didn't miss? Certainly not the listener, because this is not a visual medium.
Fair point. My baggage with Millhauser is Nathan introduced me to Millhauser a couple years back, and he was like crack for a minute. I read up Dangerous Laughter and maybe another volume of short stories or two. It's great. It was a fun little moment in the summer. And
Summer is the right time to read Stephen Millhauser.
Yeah. He's a good summer read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun read by the
you
beach.
could say early fall or late summer. If
Those
you
would be
wanted
the
to.
two.
Yeah.
Maybe a particularly gray day at the beach.
Yeah, particularly gray day. But his uncanniness often has so much to do with summer and childhood.
Yeah, there's a lot of summer vibes.
Memory and nostalgia that I really don't even think fall is quite as ideal as summer for him.
I think that's right. So,
whereas with most things that I would use the word uncanny, it would definitely be fall or even winter. But Millhauser is kind of more of a summer.
He's a summer uncanny.
He's a summer uncanny.
Yeah. So
nice.
I've read this volume before once. I guess the only thing that I'll say is that it didn't quite have the potency on the second go as he did on the first go.
I can see that.
I found the same thing. I think the best stories held up, and the best stories would definitely be Elaine Coleman and A Room with a View, or whatever it's called, A Room in the Attic.
Yeah, I agree. Those are the two best.
Those stories are great. If you do nothing else, listeners, you could probably, I'm not going to say whether you could do this or not, but I bet you could find these stories online or something like that if you're that kind of unscrupulous person. Or maybe even find them for free at the New Yorker. Your one free article a month or whatever you could read.
Or ask us to PDF it to you.
Yeah, we're not going to do that because we are law-abiding citizens.
Ask me to PDF it to you.
Those stories really hold up.
We are not, but Brandon will.
Oh, yeah. For a price.
So
That's a joke. I won't.
Yeah, no.
Don't
Or you
ask
can
me.
just go to your local half-price books and shell out $2 or $3 and get a copy of Dangerous Laughter.
Yeah, Stephen Millhauser is the kind of guy that shows up in half-price books quite a lot. Kind of person that people buy and don't hang on to, I guess.
That's too bad.
You can.
He's the kind of writer who should have more esteem than he does. Well, he has esteem with the right crowd for him to be. That's weird.
Doesn't he? I mean, I'm sure you talked about what he just teaches at a small community college or something like that.
Where does he teach? He teaches somewhere. I don't think you even said, did you?
No, I didn't say that.
If he doesn't now, he did.
Yeah.
I think he taught at least for a while at a small community college or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Nothing special.
Let's see. Skidmore College. He's on Rate My Professors there.
Nice.
Skidmore. He got a 4.83 quality.
Nice.
Okay, he's got some weird reviews. Anyways, yeah. But yeah, Skidmore College is not, known for being a beacon of English literature.
Yep. Looks like he
But a lot of these,
but 2017.
a lot of these writers, that's what'll happen is like, so I remember Dennis Johnson, he taught at like one of the branches of University of Texas, the one down on the border, like near El Paso. So yeah, it's weird where they'll show up.
Well, both of those guys probably in their
Retired
own
in
ways
2017
enjoy
That's
just
from Skidmore?
from Skidmore.
Yes.
they probably just both like doing their own thing and not being. I mean, Millhauser, just if you're going to judge from the character that he writes in every one of his stories and what you assume he's like, if you're allowed to make such value judgments based on reading his stories, he probably prefers to teach somewhere that no one's heard of and just do whatever the heck he wants.
I'm sure, and I completely respect
Teach
that.
somewhere that no one's heard of and where nobody who's coming has actually heard of him.
Of Stephen Millhauser.
Yeah.
Who thinks that he's all that special.
I think that's right. There's a poet that I really like, but he teaches like down at Florida State University somewhere. No, I mean, these guys who are really respected and have street cred with their art, they often don't. So one of the reasons is like Harvard and Yale, the people they want are going to be the politicized things that make them, or the guys that everybody in the academy at that point thinks are the smartest. And so
you came to Indiana University.
Yeah.
It's a public university and it's a well-known, it's pretty top tier as far as public universities go, but it's not
It's
Ivy
not the
League
best
or anything like that. But you came here for a professor.
I did. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, what do you guys think about old Dangerous Laughter? Jake said it didn't hold up as well as I would agree. I think these stories might be mostly once reads. They pack a nice wallop when you read them the first time, and
well, honestly, that's what you expect. That's what you're paying for with a short story. You're not really paying for something to return to. How many short story volumes? Okay, Dennis Johnson you can come back to, but maybe Hills Like White Elephants.
Flannery O'Connor.
Well, no, not Flannery O'Connor, actually. But
I've got a devilish grin right now.
I know you were being sarcastic. Yeah. No, Brandon. I'm going to interpret your sarcasm as sincerity and then say you're stupid. Well, I would say there's a couple exceptions. If you just love spending time in a world or with a character like Sherlock Holmes, say, people read those stories again and again.
But that's an anthologized. It's like even there, I don't know. I would be willing to argue that with Sherlock Holmes, once you've read all of the mysteries, you've read them. Once you've read all of the Poirot things, you don't really need to go back and reread Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you're going to pick up Agatha Christie's short stories.
What's wrong with you?
Like first of all, what happened to your brain?
We tried that.
Yeah.
Didn't go so well.
Didn't go so well for us. And so, if you get through it once because that's the sort of thing you like, even then, I don't think you come back to that well. Exactly.
Well, I guess all I really meant was sometimes you're in the mood for a flavor of ice cream, like I want chocolate. Oh, I could go for a little Poe. It's a cold winter, creepy night in the wind. Oh, I could go for a little Sherlock Holmes, and it doesn't really matter whether I've read it or maybe I half remember it. It's just like I want that feeling. There's certain people that trade in feelings, and even somebody like Arthur Conan Doyle kind of does, if only because people like the arcana of that world of 22B Baker Street and all that stuff. And Dennis Johnson, and then the other exception to Jake's rule, which I agree with, Jake's rule, by the way, would be somebody like Dennis Johnson because he's such a superb craftsman of language, and there are a handful of people. Actually, Hemingway would be another one.
Well, when it begins to verge on into the world of poetry, that's when
That's right.
It really becomes something that you can keep coming back to, right?
Right. Well, Dennis Johnson also, I guess this isn't a Dennis Johnson podcast, but his stories are so disjointed and associative that they're pretty hard to remember. Like,
That's true.
Fair point.
you read one and then
This reads like somebody who was on drugs. It is.
Yeah, I read was it The Largesse of the Mermaid?
Mm-hmm.
Which one of you has?
Yes, I need to give that back to you.
Oh, you're supposed to give it to him first.
I need to give it to Jake. Great collection.
Yeah, it's fantastic, but I don't remember any of the stories.
Me neither. And I read one pretty recently. It was about a guy that was dying, and then he remembered some other things, and then some other things happened, and then.
But while you're reading it, you're convinced this is some of the best stuff you've read.
Right.
Well, and then there are certain images or turns of phrase that do stick with you, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
That you'll never let go of.
That's right.
And I think Hemingway does the same thing with some dialogue and some descriptive passages. And
he does.
You don't need to go back to Hills with White Elephants for the story, except for as an example for students, but you do go back to it for the girl saying please, 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 and for certain effects that he achieves that are just like reading a Shakespeare soliloquy or something.
Yeah, I've read that story now twice over the last year with students, and it's one that it's a pleasure to go back to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I think you guys are right. This was my first time to read these stories. Even with Death of Elaine Coleman, I don't find myself really desperate to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And even reading it again, you're like, yeah, this is good, but I really don't want to read it. Not because I don't want to, because it's bad, but just because I don't feel the need to. I don't feel like it's giving me anything beyond what the plot was.
Right.
His style is, and that's not,
He's a
we
great
shouldn't
stylist,
give people the impression that he's a bad writer. His style is actually pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, his style is really fun.
Very vivid. And the thing that's fun about him is he loves colors, and it's like his stories kind of take place in Technicolor because everything's like these bright reds and greens and blues. And
he's really good at evoking very specific colors in really casual feeling ways.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, gosh, how much more do we want to say about Stephen Millhauser? Like, this is a good episode to maybe get people interested in him.
I really think that he is, if you've never read Millhauser, you can't do a whole lot better than picking up a volume of Millhauser and for your summer vacation, something like that. The only thing that I would say is that Millhauser can be so evocative that some people find him personally dangerous.
You know, we had that discussion. I agree, yes. We had that discussion when we did Martin Dressler, and I think it was late at night, and I haven't gone back and listened to that, and that's been years now since we did that, but I feel like maybe I ceded too much ground in that. Like, he is evocative, he is dangerous, he is sexual sometimes, never overtly, but sometimes pretty thinly veiled. So, like, Dangerous Laughter.
Dangerous Laughter is
not so
itself
thinly
as
veiled.
a short story is
it's about a bunch of girls that get together and tickle each other and laugh, and they start laughter clubs, and
it's very orgiastic.
Yeah, and they just let themselves go and laugh and laugh and laugh and achieve some kind of release. So I guess it's not sexual now that I think about it.
Not at all, Nathan. That's absurd.
Yeah, that was kind of.
I wasn't thinking that way. You guys must be perverts.
Yeah, sorry about that corny, crappy literary analysis there, folks.
Well, I'm willing to accept that we went too far there. I didn't feel the same way about him, about that, but I know that plenty of people do.
Mm-hmm.
At least I have certain people in the back of my head that feel that way about him.
Yeah, I've heard that too, but reading it this time, I mean, none of these stories tempted me, if that's what we're saying. I mean, even the Dangerous Laughter seems more like someone trying
analogy or
an allegory of this,
yeah,
but it's not trying to get you to feel provoked. I didn't feel
that. I mean,
he's not really interested in sex for sex's sake. He's interested in what's kind of uncanny or weird about sex and adolescence.
Yeah, the real one that actually.
I know exactly which one you're going to say.
The room with the room with the attic, or the room in the attic, or whatever the name of that stupid one. That's the one that is.
Yeah, that one's pretty scandalous, and it's just nothing happens that's quote unquote bad in it. But if people
you keep expecting it to,
if people don't.
If you've read Midnight's Children with us in the last year, it's just the idea of the bed sheet with the hole.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of it being, a little story in a bigger story, it's kind of the whole story. They're just in the dark together.
Yeah, it's a girl that, for whatever reason, doesn't want to come into the light. And so the neighbor boy visits her in her room, if people haven't read it. And they get to be friends and they talk and they play little games where she'll let him touch different objects and he'll have to guess what they are. And you can see how that could, again, have some sexual overtones, folks.
It's certainly playing with sexual tension.
Absolutely. And I think it's...
And the fact that, I mean, spoiler, when the light comes on, he runs because the tension is what he was digging.
Yeah. Yes.
I would say precisely what, like, it was interesting, Brandon, you said there was nothing here that was tempting or whatever, but I think for a certain sort of person, that is exactly what actually makes Millhauser dangerous. Like, if you read Edgar Allan Poe, it's just like, oh, the guy was being tortured by a horrible torture device. Oh, the Red Death killed. In other words, the uncanniness achieves a punchline, an ending, a culmination that brings it all to a head, and what you see is what you get. Oh, it was something terrible. With Millhauser, it's always an unanswered question.
Yeah.
And that's pretty intriguing. And
so to somebody who is prone to let their imagination run wild, with that open question, you leave the story and the story doesn't stop there in your mind, and that's where things
I can see that.
People.
It's precisely because he's not explicit, though. If he ever was actually sexual, his stories wouldn't have nearly the weird, uneasy sexual feeling that they can.
Or power.
Or power, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. And I would guess in that case, I would just advise that person to know yourself and
stay away.
I don't think it's a condemnation of Millhauser, because I would still recommend these stories to people if this doesn't sound like something that's gonna unlike with Midnight's Children, you have to really come at that with caveats.
Absolutely.
Because it's got stuff in it.
I think another thing I might say is, I don't know that I would recommend this book to adolescents, to a certain kind of person, even who's older, who, I mean, what I really want to say is it plays with enough of these themes, these sexual themes, these themes of power and of the difference between being a child and being an adult. That's the world that Millhauser likes to play in without being any more specific.
It takes a certain kind of maturity to be able to appreciate what's good about that without getting sucked into what's bad about it. And in some ways, it takes a certain kind of maturity and understanding what's happening to you as a reader.
Mm-hmm. This is a better book for people who like to read books, honestly. I want to say, we are more impervious to this because
we see what he's doing, right? Like, it's hard to, I mean, he plays people like a fiddle. He can get into your head and make you see and smell and taste things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In a way that very few authors really have the power to do. So if you don't have the maturity and the experience of understanding how an author is working on you, he is the kind of person that can just sweep you away and take you places and send you down a path without you realizing it. And so it takes both a sort of maybe sexual maturity, but also just a maturity when it comes to
aesthetic maturity.
An aesthetic a maturity when it comes to reading and storytelling and things like that.
Yeah, I guess the way I would think of it is that I would understand if he's a writer who you admire, but it would concern me if he was your favorite writer.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah,
I will say though that there are very few people who I would love to step into a alternate dimension and just steal their shtick, just publish their stories as my own.
Oh yeah, it'd be fun to be Millhauser.
It'd be fun to be Millhauser.
Yeah.
He is what.
Yeah.
If I had a writing career like Millhauser's, I would be perfectly satisfied.
Right. I greatly admire him. I agree with what Brandon's.
Pulitzer Prize suits you well.
I mean, he is like the kind of guy that I love. He can tap into my subconscious, make me think of dreams that I've had. I mean, he is in touch with the uncanny that I feel about the world, and he makes me see the uncanny and the mundane in a way that's pretty powerful.
It's the same with a lot of, like, I would have the same thing to say about Poe.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I've never read somebody that, as I've been able to so clearly draw the line from that person to where I feel like Nathan gets his inspiration from, just in terms of style. And that was back, I mean, we were working and writing stories in a very different way than we weren't doing podcasting.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. But yes, I think that Millhauser was
very influential.
I was like, whoa.
So you've grown and changed.
I can't believe you could do this. I mean, now that Millhauser's kind of opened up that world for me, it's like, okay, well, now there are other things that you can do actually too, and those are even more fun.
You found your own voice.
Yeah. But it was fun, when you're, I didn't know that an artist, that somebody writing could quite touch these particular chords in my mind, because it's not the same thing as supernatural literature, and it's not the same thing as realism. If I had to compare it to something that we've done, I'd say this is closest to kind of magical realism and the effect that it achieves.
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of people have that experience, especially people who want to be writers. Like, for me, there was Tolstoy, but then also as far as just enjoying poetry and finding T.S. Eliot kind of opened that. And so a lot of my younger stuff was just trying to rip him off.
Yeah.
So,
and you have to grow past that.
You have to grow past
You have to grow from T.S. Eliot into cats.
That's right.
Yeah.
What a great place to stop.
Yeah, folks, we got to be done. And I don't know if we're going to come back because on Millhauser, at least, because I don't think that there's probably much more to say or be gained from going through this story by story. But I recommend that you read this book if you've enjoyed this discussion and think that these are the kinds of things that you might be interested in reading. He's a very talented and interesting
I agree.
writer. Anything else to say about him, Jake?
Nope.
All right. We will be back next time. Let me run us through some patrons very quickly.
Yeah.
Because our patrons need to be shouted out. And of course, the way to do that is to go to patreon.com/thebookening. Give $10 or more, and you will get a shout out like the following. Guys, I'm just going to burn through this as fast as possible, and you guys can shout them out. Robert Around the Lovebirds, the Anthony Dodgers, Little Anthony Cigar Store, the Immortal Chelsea, Jimmy Bean, Little Annie Pogli, Lily of the Valley, Andrew Ness the Lovebird, the Keith Master, David's Money Man Trucking, John and Jill's Little Baby Max, Jay and Katie who are cold and love cheese, and also C.S. Lewis and Julia Fish, Fairy Princess's Mother, and Mother, Council Prime Adam, Jeremy the Dark Hood, Lord of Death, Nathan Not Me, Maya! Ryan Red Avenger, Judith the Lady of Justice, Danny the Dude, DJ Sammy G, Benny and Danny Tiberius, Eric and Catherine from Beyond Window Breaks, Professor and Lady X, Lavender's Green, Dylan, Lavender's Green, Dylan, I love you too. Noah Constructor, Mara Cheap, the Fair and Free Maiden Chloe, Anthony was cold and hazel, light, liberty in pursuit of cheese.
They do hate cheese.
Jiu-Jitsu Jeffrey, the Texas Ranger, Rachel. Libertine Thomas, Midnight Ninja Ellen, Queen can get a Return of the Jedediah, Jay Brack and Ruin, Timothy the Daughter of Dawn, Eric and Kate, the Camp Champ Kings, who are warm and love bees, Maddie, Sweet Jamie Sunshine, Taylor, the Keeper of Eternal Darkness, Laura, the Keeper of Eternal Light, Cold Steel, Cody, Jacqueline, the Librarian, John Bobadilly, Bomb Diggity, and Captain Tennille, his mate.
Captain Tennille and his mate.
And of course,
yes,
Saxophone Alex.
Saxophone Alex.
That's right.
All right, folks, we'll see you next week, probably for some Lord of the Rings.
Ooh.
Ooh. More like Gourd of the Rings.
Oh boy, is it Halloween already?
If only.